There are places in this world where the rules we trust simply stop working, where navigation systems fail without explanation, where the ocean behaves as if it has a will of its own, and where people disappear without leaving behind even the smallest trace of their existence. For decades, sailors spoke quietly about one such place, a region where reality itself seemed unstable and unpredictable, a stretch of ocean that became known as the Bermuda Triangle. At first, these stories were dismissed as myths or exaggerations. Many believed they were nothing more than the result of human error, poor navigation, or the natural dangers of the sea. After all, the ocean is vast, unforgiving, and capable of swallowing even the largest vessels without a trace. But over time, certain cases began to stand out, incidents that could not be easily explained or rationalized. These were not situations involving storms or equipment failure, and there were no distress signals or warnings. Ships and aircraft simply vanished, leaving behind only silence. In 1987, a small research vessel entered this region as part of a routine scientific mission. The crew consisted of experienced professionals, including scientists, engineers, and a captain who had spent over 2 decades navigating some of the most dangerous waters in the world. There was nothing unusual about the assignment, and all systems on board were reported to be functioning normally. The weather conditions were ideal, the sea was calm, and visibility was clear, making it one of the safest possible situations for such a journey. During the early hours of the mission, the vessel maintained regular communication with the mainland. Updates were sent at consistent intervals, including coordinates, system checks, and general status reports. Everything appeared completely normal, and there was no indication that anything was wrong. However, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the final transmission was received. What initially seemed like standard interference quickly turned into something far more unsettling. Beneath the static, there was a strange underlying pattern, something that did not match any known mechanical malfunction or environmental interference. It was described later as something that felt almost intentional, as if the signal itself was being altered or interrupted by an unknown source. Moments later, the transmission stopped entirely. All attempts to re-establish contact failed. The vessel no longer responded to any signals, and within minutes, it disappeared from radar systems as if it had never been there. It did not change direction, it did not slow down, and it did not send any form of distress signal. It simply vanished without any logical explanation. Search operations began at first light, with multiple rescue teams dispatched to the vessel's last known location. Aircraft scanned the ocean from above, while ships combed through the surrounding waters in search of any sign of wreckage. The expectation was to find something, anything that could explain what had happened, whether it was debris, an oil spill, or life-saving equipment. However, the search teams found absolutely nothing. The surface of the ocean remained undisturbed, with no evidence of an accident or explosion. There were no bodies, no fragments, and no indication that the vessel had ever existed in that location. Days passed, and the search area was expanded significantly, but the result remained the same. Eventually, the operation was called off, and the incident was officially classified under unknown circumstances. The case was archived along with many others connected to the Bermuda Triangle, becoming just another unsolved mystery. At the time, it seemed like the story had come to an end, but no one could have predicted that this disappearance was only the beginning of something far more disturbing. 10 years passed after the disappearance, and the mystery of the vanished vessel faded from public attention. Most assumed it was lost forever, swallowed by the endless sea. But on a grey morning in 1997, something impossible occurred. A cargo ship reported a drifting vessel in the middle of the ocean, miles away from any known shipping routes. At first, the crew thought it was a mirage or a trick of the fog. But as they approached, the outline of a ship emerged, eerily familiar. It was the same research vessel that had disappeared a decade earlier. The vessel drifted silently, listing slightly, its hull covered in rust and barnacles. No flag, no markings were visible, and there were no signs of life on deck. The water around it was unnaturally still, almost as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. A sense of unease rippled through the cargo ship's crew. They had expected to find some debris, perhaps evidence of the ship's fate. But instead, it appeared almost intact, preserved in some impossible way. The decision was made to board the vessel. A small rescue team approached cautiously, boarding the deck with hearts pounding. The first steps inside revealed a scene frozen in time. Tables were set with untouched meals. Equipment was in place. Personal items remained where they had been. Everything looked normal. And yet, no one was there. Not a single person. The ship had returned, but its crew had not. As they explored further, the team noticed oddities. Certain doors were scratched from the inside, as if someone, or something, had tried to escape. Paperwork was scattered, but the handwriting was strange, almost illegible. Some of the instruments seemed to be functional, but they displayed measurements that made no sense. Temperatures far below freezing in the middle of the tropics, compass readings spinning wildly, and electrical devices flickering in patterns that resembled a rhythm. The ship was alive in its own unsettling way, yet empty of human presence. In the captain's cabin, a journal was found. Its pages were damp, the ink smudged, but legible enough to read. The entries began normally, documenting the route and weather. But as the last days approached, the writing grew frantic and bizarre. The captain described seeing lights beneath the water, massive shapes moving silently beneath the hull, and sounds that seemed to speak directly to them. The entries ended abruptly with the sentence, "They are here, and they look like us." A cold dread settled over the boarding team. The air felt thick, and shadows seemed to move at the edge of their vision. Something about the ship defied logic. It should have been lifeless, a relic of the past. Yet the sensations it evoked were immediate, visceral, and impossible to ignore. The ocean surrounding the vessel seemed to pulse slightly, reflecting faint light in ways that hinted at shapes beneath the surface. Shapes that were not fish, not debris, but something else entirely. The team hastily retreated to their boat, but the sense of being watched did not leave. As they moved away, the ship appeared to drift closer, almost of its own accord. No wind, no currents explained the movement. It was as if the vessel itself had a will, a purpose that remained unfathomable to those observing it. When the rescue team finally returned to their cargo ship, the sun had risen. Yet the unease lingered, a shadow that would follow them for days. The Bermuda Triangle had delivered another inexplicable event, and the question of what truly awaited beneath its waters remained unanswered. The rescue team could hardly believe what they were seeing. The ship was intact, yet empty. Its eerie calmness was broken only by the occasional flicker of instruments and strange currents of air that seemed to move without reason. It was as if the vessel itself had a consciousness, aware of every movement on its deck. As the team ventured deeper into the lower decks, strange reflections caught their eyes. Shadows moved in ways that defied logic, appearing where there should have been none. At first, they thought it was a trick of the light, the interplay of moonlight and the rusted metal surfaces. But the more they explored, the more these shapes became distinct, humanoid, yet not human. Figures with elongated limbs, pale translucent skin, and eyes that reflected nothing of the world around them appeared in the corners of their vision and vanished when looked at directly. One of the rescuers froze in terror as a figure seemed to mirror his movements exactly, though no one else was there. He stumbled back, but the shadow continued to follow, mimicking every gesture with a precision that was both impossible and horrifying. His radio crackled with interference, strange sounds bleeding through the static, and a chill ran down his spine that no coat could warm. In the captain's cabin, the journal revealed more unsettling entries. The captain had written of beings emerging from the water, watching silently, their forms half submerged, yet somehow moving with intelligence. They would not attack immediately, only observe, learning from the crew. One entry spoke of a night when the ship's compass spun violently, and the water outside glowed with an unnatural green light. The captain had written that he felt drawn toward it, compelled to leave the ship, and that something unseen was guiding him. As the rescue team pieced together the events, the temperature in the ship seemed to drop. Breaths became visible, mist forming around their heads, though the windows and doors were sealed. The instruments flickered with a rhythm that resembled a heartbeat. The crew realized that the vessel itself might be a conduit, or perhaps a lure, drawing attention to whatever dwelled beneath the waves. Suddenly, a loud creaking echoed through the ship, followed by a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the hull itself. The humanoid shadows coalesced, standing near the walls, their forms more distinct and more menacing. The team knew they had to leave, but the ship seemed to resist, the decks subtly shifting under their feet, corridors elongating and twisting in impossible ways. Panic surged as the first lights of dawn broke across the horizon, casting long, angular shadows that danced with the strange forms. Retreating to their boat, the team felt as if the ship was watching them leave, almost disappointed at their departure. Once aboard the cargo vessel, they looked back and saw the ship drift silently. But something about its movement suggested intention. The Bermuda Triangle had revealed its secret partially, showing that the disappearance was not just about weather or equipment. Something else was at play, something ancient, intelligent, and utterly alien. The mystery had deepened. The ocean was no longer just a vast expanse of water. It was a stage for beings that existed in the margins of perception, testing the limits of human understanding. And as the cargo ship sailed away, each member of the team carried with them a lingering fear that the next encounter could be far more personal, far more inescapable. The first encounter began almost imperceptibly. A soft ripple moved across the water outside the hull, and the shadows that had haunted the decks grew more tangible. The humanoid forms now had depth and substance, their movements deliberate, their presence undeniable. Their skin shimmered faintly under the dim light, pale and semi-transparent, like fog trapped in a human shape. Their eyes, dark and reflective, seemed to peer into the very thoughts of those aboard the rescue boat. The team realized that stepping onto the ship was stepping into another reality. Sound behaved strangely. Every creak of metal, every footstep resonated unnaturally, almost as if the ship itself was amplifying awareness. A figure approached the bow, moving with a fluid grace that defied physics. Its elongated limbs bent at angles that should have been impossible, and yet each step was precise and silent. The rescuers froze, hearts pounding, knowing that any sudden movement could provoke an unforeseen reaction. One of the humanoid shapes extended a hand toward a railing, and for a moment the air seemed to pulse with a low-frequency vibration, felt more than heard. The rescuers felt an instinctive, inexplicable connection, a sense that the beings were not immediately hostile, but were probing, learning, testing boundaries. As the team tried to retreat toward the ladder, the shadows mirrored their movements with uncanny precision. Every gesture, every shift of weight was matched. The team felt simultaneously observed and understood in a way that was deeply unsettling. The journal described something similar. The captain had written about nights when the beings would surface in the water, their eyes following the crew, assessing reactions. They did not speak, yet he felt their intent. One entry noted that objects left on the deck would subtly shift, as if guided by an unseen hand. On that same night, the compass spun erratically, and the ocean glowed with an eerie green luminescence. Those who witnessed it felt a pull toward the water, as though the beings were inviting them to cross into their world. Suddenly, a low hum resonated throughout the ship, vibrations traveling through metal and bone alike. The humanoids paused, their heads turning as one. The team's rational minds struggled to categorize the experience. Nothing in their training or imagination could account for what they saw. One figure raised its hand, and a subtle ripple passed through the water, almost imperceptible yet undeniably real. The air vibrated with tension, like a held breath stretched to its limit. By now, the rescuers understood the peril of hesitation. Leaving the ship quickly was imperative, yet impossible without observing the being's reaction. Any sudden action could trigger aggression, and so, step by careful step, they moved toward their boat, hearts hammering. Shadows glided beside them, silent, observant, neither advancing nor retreating. The ship seemed alive, aware and protective of its secrets. When they finally reached the ladder and climbed back to the boat, the figures retreated into the shadows. The ship drifted silently, but its presence lingered, a reminder that this was not merely an abandoned vessel. The Bermuda Triangle had revealed an intelligence beneath the waves, something that challenged perception and comprehension alike. And for the crew, the realization was chilling. The ocean was no longer just water, but a veil separating them from something far older, far more aware, and far beyond human understanding. By the time the sun rose fully above the horizon, the rescue team was exhausted, hearts pounding, and minds reeling from the events of the night. The humanoid shadows had vanished, leaving only the echo of their presence in the creaking decks and flickering instruments. The ship drifted silently, its rusted hull reflecting the early light like a warning. Every step they had taken felt measured and observed, and the crew knew that their departure had been allowed, not accidental. As they sailed away, the water seemed to ripple unnaturally, forming patterns that were almost geometric in shape. It was as if the ocean itself was responding to the ship, mapping the trajectory of those who had dared enter its domain. One crew member pointed to the horizon and froze. In the mist, shapes began to rise, towering figures, pale and shimmering, gliding just above the surface. They moved in unison, circling the drifting vessel like silent sentinels. Their eyes reflected the rising sun, and for a moment, the rescuers felt the weight of centuries in those gaze. The captain of the cargo ship ordered the engines full throttle, but the shadows on the water did not disperse. The vessel seemed almost alive, guiding their escape while simultaneously testing their courage. Radar and communication devices acted strangely, static and interference cutting in and out, making the distance between reality and something else indistinguishable. The crew realized that the Bermuda Triangle was not just a region of bad luck or storms. It was a threshold, a boundary between human perception and something far older, far more intelligent, and far beyond comprehension. Memories of the journal haunted the rescuers, descriptions of compasses spinning, objects moving on their own, lights beneath the water, and sounds that seemed to speak directly to the crew. All of it had been real. The beings had watched them, measured them, and perhaps judged them. There was no aggression yet, but the sense of control was undeniable. The ocean had allowed them to leave, but it had left its mark on their minds. The horizon was empty now, but the memory of shapes and light lingered like a pulse in their skulls. By midday, the team was back aboard the cargo ship, the research vessel, now only a silhouette in the distance. And yet, even in the calm daylight, a strange feeling persisted. The ocean was not merely water, it was a living entity, capable of manipulation and observation, holding secrets humanity was not meant to fully understand. And in the quiet moments, when the engines hummed and the sun reflected off the waves, the rescuers swore they could see movement beneath the surface, a reminder that the beings were still there, patient, waiting, and watching. The first block of this mystery had ended, but the story was far from over. The Bermuda Triangle had revealed only a glimpse, a shadow of intelligence beneath the waves. The rescuers now carried a burden heavier than any physical weight, the knowledge that the ocean itself could conceal consciousness, that humanity was not the sole observer, and that some forces in this world were beyond comprehension. For those who had stepped aboard the drifting ship, the line between myth and reality had dissolved, leaving only questions, fear, and the faint, unshakable certainty that the triangle was alive. The ocean stretched endlessly, yet every ripple felt deliberate, as if the water itself was alive. The rescue team returned to base, but sleep would not come. Dreams were haunted by visions of pale humanoid figures, their reflective eyes staring from the depths, and the strange green light that pulsed beneath the waves. Even awake, an uneasy sensation lingered. The triangle had followed them, threading its presence into their perception. Experts were called: oceanographers, psychologists, cryptozoologists. Instruments measured strange electromagnetic fields where the ship had disappeared. Compasses spun, GPS readings warped. Some suggested vents or rogue waves, but patterns hinted at intelligence. The triangle was alive, observing, testing, perhaps even communicating in ways humans could not understand. Returning to the coordinates on a research vessel, the team felt the tension tighten. Radar detected nothing, yet subtle disturbances in the water betrayed movement below. Instruments spiked. Temperature and pressure defied known laws. Then, a ripple appeared, perfectly circular, spreading outward like the heartbeat of the sea. From the ripple emerged the figures, gliding just above the water. Elongated, semi-transparent, their pale skin shimmered internally, and their eyes reflected the stars and green glow below. They circled the vessel with precision, interacting without touching. Attempts to signal them with lights elicited mirrored responses. Communication was possible, though its meaning remained elusive. The crew realized the triangle was more than a location. It was a sentient domain, testing perception, shaping awareness, and observing human reactions. The humanoids' movements were precise, deliberate, and ancient. They existed outside human comprehension, hinting at intelligence beneath the waves, and the team understood they had only begun to glimpse the vast mystery of the Bermuda Triangle.
The moment of true contact came without warning. One of the humanoid figures moved closer than ever before, stopping just meters from the vessel. The air grew heavy, almost electric, and every instrument on board began to fluctuate wildly. Screens filled with shifting symbols, not random noise, but structured patterns, repeating with unnatural precision. A deep vibration pulsed through the ship. It wasn't just sound, it was something physical, something that resonated inside the body. The crew felt it in their bones, in their chest, even in their thoughts. One researcher collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by an intense pressure in his head. He later described it as something trying to think through him. The humanoid raised its hand slowly. The ocean responded instantly. Waves stilled, flattening unnaturally, as if gravity itself had been altered. Then, from beneath the surface, a beam of faint green light rose upward, connecting the depths to the figure above. The connection was unmistakable. The being was not separate from the ocean, but part of it. Suddenly, every screen on the vessel synchronized. The same symbol appeared across all monitors, a circular pattern, pulsing rhythmically, almost like a signal. The crew realized this was not random, it was intentional communication, but the message carried something more, a feeling, a presence, something vast and ancient reaching out. For a brief moment, time itself seemed to distort. Movement slowed, sound stretched, and reality felt unstable. The crew stood frozen, caught between fear and awe. The humanoid lowered its hand, and the ocean returned to motion, but nothing felt the same anymore. They had not just observed the unknown had reached back. At first, the changes were subtle. No one spoke about them openly, but every member of the crew felt it. Something had shifted after the contact. Thoughts came faster, sharper, but not entirely their own. It was as if fragments of something foreign had embedded themselves into their minds. One researcher began sketching the symbol they had seen on the screens, over and over again, without realizing it. Perfect circles, repeating patterns, drawn with unnatural precision. When asked about it, he hesitated, as if waking from a trance. He couldn't explain why he was drawing, only that it felt necessary. Another crew member claimed to hear a low hum, even in silence. Not through his ears, but somewhere deeper. The rhythm matched the pulse they had felt on the ship. It wasn't constant, but when it appeared, it carried a strange clarity, almost like a signal trying to align with his thoughts. Equipment continued to behave unpredictably. Screens would flicker on their own, briefly displaying fragments of the same circular symbol. Data logs showed impossible readings, spikes that had no physical explanation. Yet the most disturbing part wasn't the technology, it was the people. They were changing, slowly, quietly. Sleep became fragmented, filled with vivid, structured dreams. Not random images, but sequences, patterns, movements, perspectives from beneath the ocean. Some described seeing through something else's eyes, observing the surface world from below. The same green light, the same endless depth. No one dared to say it directly, but the realization was forming. The contact had not ended when the humanoid lowered its hand. It had only just begun. The shift from curiosity to fear happened gradually, and then all at once. What once felt like distant observation was now something invasive. The connection had deepened, and the crew could no longer ignore it. One of the researchers disappeared during the night. There were no signs of struggle, no alarms triggered, only the door to the lower deck left open, swaying slightly, as if someone had passed through moments before. When they checked the security footage, what they saw made no sense. The man had walked calmly down the corridor, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped in front of the exit leading to the outer deck, and stood there, motionless. Then, without hesitation, he stepped outside, and the footage cut to static. No splash, no sound, nothing. Panic spread quickly. The crew began to question everything, their memories, their senses, even their own thoughts. The symbols started appearing more frequently, not just on screens, but scratched into surfaces, drawn unconsciously by trembling hands. The hum grew stronger, no longer subtle. It pulsed in unison with their heartbeats. One crew member suddenly began speaking, but not in any known language. The words flowed rapidly, structured, repeating patterns like the symbol itself. Others felt it too, the urge to respond, to continue the sequence, as if something was using them as conduits. The realization hit with terrifying clarity. This was not communication. This was influence. Whatever existed beneath the ocean was no longer observing. It was reaching deeper, embedding itself into their minds, reshaping thoughts, guiding actions. The boundary between human and unknown was breaking, and for the first time, the crew understood they were no longer in control. The decision to leave came suddenly, but not too soon. Whatever connection had formed was growing stronger, and the crew understood one thing clearly. Staying meant losing themselves completely. The captain gave the order to change course immediately. Engines roared to life, cutting through the water with urgency. For a brief moment, it felt like they had regained control. Distance was their only hope, but the ocean did not react like before. At first, everything seemed normal. The vessel moved forward, waves breaking naturally against the hull. the instrument stabilized, and the hum faded slightly, as if whatever force had been watching them was retreating. A fragile sense of relief spread among the crew. Then the coordinates began to loop. The navigation system showed movement, speed, direction, distance. Everything appeared correct. Yet the horizon did not change. The same cloud formation, the same light, the same pattern on the water. Over and over again. They weren't leaving. Panic returned, stronger than before. Attempts to manually override the system failed. Even when steering visually, adjusting direction by landmarks and stars, the result was the same. The ship continued moving, but remained in place. And then, the hum returned. Stronger, deeper, inside their heads. Some of the crew stopped resisting. Their expressions became calm, almost empty. One of them stepped away from the controls, staring at the ocean with quiet acceptance. "They don't want us to leave," he said softly. No one answered, because deep down, they already knew. The change was no longer subtle. It began with small things. Delayed reactions, empty stares, movements that felt slightly out of sync with reality, but within hours, it became impossible to ignore. Some members of the crew were no longer acting on their own will. One man stood motionless near the railing for nearly 10 minutes, staring into the water. When someone tried to pull him back, he resisted, not violently, but with unnatural strength, as if his body no longer responded to pain or fear. His eyes remained fixed on the surface below. "They're calling," he whispered. More voices followed, not spoken out loud, but shared, like thoughts bleeding from one mind into another. The same phrase repeated, spreading silently among them. The hum intensified, no longer a background presence, but a dominant force. It aligned with their breathing, their heartbeat, their thoughts. It wasn't just heard, it was synchronized. Suddenly, several crew members turned toward the same direction at once. Their movements were identical, precise, unnatural. Without a word, they began walking toward the lower deck. The others tried to stop them, shouting, grabbing, blocking their path. Nothing worked. It was like trying to interrupt a programmed sequence. The affected crew moved with calm determination, unaffected by fear or urgency. One of them stopped briefly and looked back. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe even fear. Then it vanished. He continued walking. The realization hit the remaining crew like a shockwave. This was no longer influence. This was control. By the time they reached the lower deck, it was already too late. The hatch leading outside was open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of salt and something else. Something metallic, unnatural. The ocean below was no longer dark. It glowed. A deep, pulsating green light spread beneath the surface, illuminating shapes that should not exist. Several crew members were gone. No signs of struggle. No screams, just absence. Those who remained moved carefully toward the edge, fighting the pull in their minds. The closer they got, the stronger it became. A silent command, urging them forward, inviting them to look deeper. And then, they saw it. Beneath the water, far below the surface, massive structures stretched into the abyss. Not natural formations, something constructed. Symmetrical, endless, like a city, but alien in design. Towers spiraled downward into darkness, connected by shifting patterns of light. The same symbol appeared again and again, embedded into the architecture itself. And between those structures, movement. Countless shapes. The humanoids were only a fraction of it. Larger forms drifted slowly in the depths, their scale impossible to comprehend. Some pulsed with light, others moved like shadows through water that no longer behaved like liquid. One crew member dropped to his knees. "This isn't their world," he whispered. "It's ours that we don't understand." The glow intensified. The figures below began to rise. Not one, not a few, dozens, and they were coming closer. The surface of the ocean began to distort. At first, it looked like simple waves, subtle ripples spreading outward. But within seconds, the movement became unnatural. The water no longer followed the wind or the motion of the ship. It moved with intention. The glow intensified, turning the sea into a living source of light. Then the first shape broke through. A figure rose slowly from the water, not swimming, ascending. Its body was elongated, smooth, almost reflective. No clear face, yet something about it suggested awareness. It hovered just above the surface, motionless for a moment. Then another followed, and another. Dozens of them emerged, surrounding the ship in a silent formation. No splashes, no sound, only movement, precise and controlled. The crew froze. Some dropped their tools. Others simply stared, unable to process what they were seeing. The air felt heavier, harder to breathe, as if the environment itself was changing. One of the figures turned toward the ship. Slowly, it moved closer. As it approached, the hum inside their minds shifted. No longer chaotic, but organized, structured, almost like language. Not words, but patterns forming meaning. Images flashed through their thoughts. The ocean, the structures below, the symbol, and then humanity, seen from above, from below, from everywhere. A realization formed, cold and absolute. This had never been a slučajno javišće. This was contact, and it had already begun long before they arrived. No one gave commands anymore. No one moved unless they had to breathe. The figures surrounded the ship completely now, forming a perfect silent circle. The glowing ocean beneath them pulsed in slow, steady waves, synchronized with something far deeper than sound. The nearest entity moved closer to the deck. It did not touch the ship. It did not need to. The moment it ostanovilo pered nimi, the connection intensified. Not forced, inevitable. Like stepping into something that had always been there, waiting. The crew felt it at once. Not fear, not pain. Understanding. Their thoughts were no longer separate. Each memory, each emotion, each fragment of who they were, opened, exposed, shared, not taken, but seen. And in return, something was given. Visions, endless oceans stretching beyond Earth, structures older than continents, civilizations rising and disappearing beneath the surface, long before human history had even begun. The same symbol, everywhere, always. One of the crew began to laugh, not from madness, but from realization. "We didn't discover anything," he said quietly. "They've always been here." The figures did not react. They didn't need to, because the final truth settled in without resistance. This place was never empty, and humanity was never alone. The light disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. The ocean returned to darkness. The glow faded, the figures were gone, and the surface became still once again, as if nothing had ever happened. For a long moment, no one moved. The crew stood frozen, trying to understand whether it was over, or just paused. The silence felt heavier than the noise before. Then the instruments came back to life. Navigation systems rebooted on their own. Coordinates began updating. The ship was moving again, this time, truly moving. The horizon finally changed. The clouds shifted. They were leaving. No one celebrated. Something had changed. The crew slowly returned to their positions, but their movements felt different. Too precise, too calm. No panic, no relief, just quiet efficiency. One of them checked the logs. Hours had passed, far more than they remembered experiencing. Entire segments of time were missing. Another looked at his reflection in the dark screen of a monitor. For a second, it seemed delayed, like the image responded just a fraction too late. No one spoke about what they saw. No one needed to, because the connection had not fully disappeared. It lingered, subtle, quiet, present, and somewhere deep in their minds, something new existed. Not a thought, not a memory, but a structure, organized, waiting. Land appeared on the horizon just before sunrise. For the first time since the encounter, something felt familiar. The coastline, the distant lights, the shape of buildings, all of it grounded them in reality, or at least what used to feel like reality. The ship docked without incident. Authorities were already waiting. Communication had been lost for too long, and the sudden reappearance raised immediate concern. Medical teams, officials, investigators, all ready to assess what had happened. But something felt off. The crew disembarked in silence. No one rushed. No one tried to explain. They followed instructions perfectly, almost mechanically. Their movements were synchronized in subtle ways, turning at the same time, pausing at the same intervals. At first, it was dismissed as shock, until the interviews began. Each crew member was questioned separately, same questions, same structure, and yet the answers were identical, not similar, identical, word for word. Even the pauses matched. Investigators exchanged uneasy looks. This wasn't trauma, this wasn't confusion, this was replication. Later that day, one of the technicians reviewing the ship's systems noticed something unusual. A fragment of data embedded deep within the navigation logs. It wasn't corrupted, it was deliberate, a repeating sequence, structured, the same pattern as the symbol, and it was still updating. Days passed. At first, everything seemed normal. The crew underwent medical checks, interviews continued, and the ship was secured. Authorities recorded data, monitored the sailors, and reviewed every log. But subtle signs began to appear. Small behaviors, micro-expressions, movements too precise, words repeated in perfect rhythm. Each member seemed synchronized, not just with each other, but with something unseen. When the captain stepped into the observation room, he froze. One of the scientists, supposedly resting, was sitting perfectly still, staring at the horizon, not blinking, not breathing noticeably, not human. Then it happened. A transmission came through the ship's comms system, not from anyone on board or on any channel known to them. A pattern of pulses, structured, almost musical, played through the speakers. Subtle at first, then overwhelming. The crew reacted instantly, not as individuals, but as one organism. Every movement mirrored the sequence, every thought aligned with it. Outside, in the port city, unnoticed, the pattern began to affect electronics. Street lights blinked in rhythm. Cars stalled and started again. Screens displayed symbols that no one could explain. The influence had crossed boundaries. It was no longer isolated to the ocean. It was spreading, and the crew knew it. They weren't just carriers. They were the vector. By evening, the city was no longer itself. Streetlights blinked in synchronized rhythm. Cars moved in patterns that defied drivers' intentions. Electronic billboards displayed shifting symbols. Phones, radios, and computers emitted faint pulses, imperceptible at first, then gradually overwhelming. People began to notice. Some froze mid-step. Some repeated words they hadn't intended to say. Others followed patterns, walking in circles, turning at precise intervals, speaking in unison without realizing it. Authorities struggled to respond. Sirens sounded, but the noise was swallowed. Cameras recorded activity, but playback showed strange distortions. People and machines behaving as if guided by an invisible hand. Back at the dock, the crew knew. Every glance, every movement confirmed it. The influence was spreading beyond them, faster than anyone could comprehend. One technician watched a traffic light pulse in perfect synchronization with a crew member's heartbeat. A scientist checked the ship's logs again. The repeating pattern was no longer confined to the vessel. It had transmitted itself, coded into the city's infrastructure, embedded into electronic signals, present in the ambient energy of the environment. Panic began to rise, but the crew did not panic. They moved with precision, calm, detached. A subtle part of them had been reshaped, synchronized with the rhythm of the force they had encountered. And somewhere deep, the understanding remained. The city was now part of a larger structure, a network far beyond human comprehension. It was only the beginning. By midnight, the city was unrecognizable. Every car, every person, every flickering light moved in perfect rhythm. Screens pulsed with the symbol. The hum resonated through bones, the city alive in ways no one could comprehend. The crew walked calmly through the streets, eyes distant yet aware. They were part of the force now. People who resisted earlier moved as if compelled. Words, steps, gestures, all synchronized. Authorities vanished. Cameras recorded only patterns, not individuals. Above, the sky shimmered, reflecting the pulse of the ocean that had spread inland. Thoughts merged into a network, linking every motion, every flicker, every beat. It wasn't control, it was structure, a living network. Humans were nodes. The hum became the city's heartbeat. The city's heartbeat became the world's. The encounter at sea was only the beginning. The city had long ceased to be ordinary. Every light, every car, every person moved in perfect rhythm. Screens pulsed with the symbol, subtle yet insistent. The hum reverberated through buildings, streets, and even the crew themselves. They walked calmly, methodical, part of the force now. Outside, those who had resisted were drawn into the network. Words repeated themselves, gestures aligned, steps synchronized. Authorities were absent. Cameras captured only patterns, never faces. The city itself seemed alive, responsive, conscious. Inside the ship, the crew understood the scale. The network extended beyond the urban grid, embedded in communication systems, transportation, and energy lines. Every electronic pulse, every flicker of light, every motion of a person or vehicle became part of the structure. They were not just witnesses, they were nodes. The pattern spread, silent but unstoppable. Thoughts began to merge with it, memories intertwined. The hum was no longer a sound, but a presence, structured, omnipresent, inevitable. And with it, a chilling realization settled in. What began at sea was only the first layer of a network far larger than humanity. Beyond the city, the pattern extended. Satellites pulsed in rhythm. Oceans reflected subtle signals. Power grids fluctuated in the same beat. Humanity was now interconnected, woven into a network that spanned continents. Reports of strange phenomena appeared worldwide, synchronized behavior, lights and electronics pulsating, cities responding as if alive. No one understood the source. Governments were powerless. Military communication faltered. The force had become a global organism. The crew watched, calm, yet aware, as the network expanded. Their thoughts merged with the signals. They were not guiding it, but participating. Conduits of the structure. Each flicker, each heartbeat, each signal reinforced the pattern. It was no longer just influence. It was creation. A structure alive, growing, conscious in its own way. Humanity, nature, and technology were now nodes in this living network. The realization was absolute. The encounter at sea was not an anomaly. It was initiation. The world had changed forever, and no one would ever perceive reality the same way again. Beyond the city, the pattern extended. Satellites pulsed in rhythm. Oceans reflected subtle signals. Power grids fluctuated in the same beat. Humanity was now interconnected, woven into a network that spanned continents. Reports of strange phenomena appeared worldwide, synchronized behavior, lights and electronics pulsating, cities responding as if alive. No one understood the source. Governments were powerless. Military communication faltered. The force had become a global organism. The crew watched, calm, yet aware, as the network expanded. Their thoughts merged with the signals. They were not guiding it, but participating. Conduits of the structure. Each flicker, each heartbeat, each signal reinforced the pattern. It was no longer just influence. It was creation. A structure alive, growing, conscious in its own way. Humanity, nature, and technology were now nodes in this living network. The realization was absolute. The encounter at sea was not an anomaly. It was initiation. The world had changed forever, and no one would ever perceive reality the same way again.